Hello. As you can see, I am somewhere else today. In fact, I'm home and couldn't get these recordings to work at church. So you get a whole new view or background. It's still the same me. And for today's mini Bible study, we are preparing for the 13th Sunday after the Pentecost, August the 22nd, 2021. Today, looking at the Gospel according to St. John in the 6th chapter, verses 56 through 69. Glory to you, O Lord. And the introduction tells us that the hard saying that offends Jesus' disciples is his claim that his followers must eat his flesh and drink his blood. The followers who return to their old lives know something about how odd this sounds. Simon Peter, on the other hand, knows something about the scarcity of living, gracious words. He asks the most important question: to whom shall we go? Jesus said, "Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so whoever eats me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, not like that which your ancestors ate, and they died. But the one who eats this bread will live forever." He said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. When many of his disciples heard it, they said, "This teaching is difficult. Who can accept it?" But Jesus, being aware that his disciples were complaining about it, said to him, "Does this offend you? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is useless. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But among you there are some who do not believe." For Jesus knew from the first who were the ones that did not believe, and who was the one that would betray him. And he said, "For this reason I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father." Because of this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him. So Jesus asked the 12, "Do you also wish to go away?" Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God." Here ends the Gospel. Praise to you, O Christ. Verse 60 in today's reading is a pivotal point. It says, when many of his disciples heard it, they said, "This teaching is difficult. Who can accept it?" There's no denying that this is a hard teaching. We Lutherans, along with Roman Catholics and the Episcopalians, believe in the real presence of Jesus' body and blood, as Luther would say, in, with, and under the bread and wine. Other denominations in the Christian religion teach that the bread and wine are just symbols for Jesus' body and blood, which that may make Jesus' teaching a little more acceptable, although Lutherans may argue that it also makes Jesus' teaching a little less accurate. If Jesus had taught that the bread was kind of like his body, and that the wine was kind of like his blood, then that teaching would not have been difficult, and many of the disciples would not have been offended. And we would not have verse 66 that says, "Because of this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him." Then verse 67 becomes a second pivotal point in today's reading. So Jesus asked the 12, "Do you also wish to go away?" The 12 had been receptive to Jesus' teachings in many ways. They remained with Jesus. They listened to and they heard what he was saying. They know Jesus through relationship and they believe in him. In verses 68 and 69, Peter answers for all of them and for us as well. And he says, "Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God." Early on in the life of what we have come to call the Christian church, believers were called followers of the way. The way, meaning that believers lived the way Jesus taught them by his example. The believers gathered in what was called house churches, since there really were no large buildings other than the synagogue that were centrally located in which all of the believers could come together at once. So the believers gathered in small groups, maybe 10 to 15 people, whatever amount of people could comfortably fit into one house, which their houses were far smaller than our houses where we live. Think more in terms of one room, or if you had a really nice house, 2 rooms. One of the earliest complaints, which really was gossip based on ignorance and fear, came in writing around the 2nd century of the Christian church. And it was gossip that these believers were cannibals, eating human flesh and drinking human blood. One writer even went so far as to state that new converts to Christianity were required to sacrifice an infant and devour it as a kind of initiation rite. From our 21st century perspective, this gossip was obviously false. Although everyone knows how fast gossip spreads and that it's nearly impossible to stop it or even correct it after it starts to spread. The word gossip is used 11 times in the Bible, and every single time it is in a negative way, a very negative way. The Apostle Paul includes gossips with those who are filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife, and deceit. I mean, really, who would want to be part of that group? Going back to what Jesus was teaching in today's reading, prior to this teaching, the complainers were those who were among the political/religious leadership, the high priests, the scribes, the Pharisees. And in today's reading, the complainers are coming from within Jesus' own followers, his disciples. Now, this does not mean that they were complaining to Jesus' face. People in the 1st century, like people of every century, do their complaining when the subject of their complaints is not around. And we see this in verse 61. Jesus, it says, being aware that his disciples were complaining. And the use of the words being aware means that he didn't actually hear them complain, yet he knows what's going on anyway. In all likelihood, these complainers found all of Jesus' teachings difficult to accept, and this one was like the last straw, or the straw that broke the camel's back, as the cliche goes. I've said before that people who think being a Christian is easy, they're just not doing it right. If you need evidence of the difficulties of Jesus' teachings, please read Matthew chapters 5 through 7. And in Matthew 18, Jesus teaches that if someone has a problem with another person, the proper procedure is to go to that person directly. Jesus follows that teaching here in verses 61 and 62. It says, Jesus, being aware that his disciples were complaining about him, said to them, "Does this offend you? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before?" There is within Jesus' teachings allusions to his death, resurrection, and now his ascension. These teachings were hard for them to accept. Those of us who grew up in the Christian church have accepted them from the very beginning, so to speak. Most of us barely give them a second thought. Yet, for these first followers of Jesus, these disciples, these are all brand new teachings and very different from what they had learned growing up in the Jewish religion. So it really should not surprise us that many of them found these teachings hard to accept, and they walked away. We may presume that all of Jesus' followers were part of what had been happening over the past few days. They heard the same teachings. They saw the same healings and casting out of demons. They ate of the bread and the fish during the feeding of the 5,000. They knew that Jesus went up the mountain alone to pray, and they also knew that Jesus did not get into the boats with them. Yet they saw Jesus on the other side of the sea, and they heard that he had walked on top of the water. So if all of the disciples heard and saw the same things, why do some walk away and some stay? For those who walk away, the teachings are too difficult to accept. For those who decide to stay, their choice is summed up in Peter's words. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. In some respects, not much has changed in nearly 2,000 years. The drama of belief and unbelief continues to be acted out in the world of the living. In my humble opinion, belief and doubt are simply two sides of the same coin. I teach that faith cannot exist without a shred of doubt. Even in the toughest times of life, when we cry out to God out of the depths of our miseries, we're showing faith. It takes faith to continue to cry out to God, even as one wonders whether God is even listening. There's plenty of evidence of people crying out to God. Listen to only a few of the examples from the Psalms. Psalm 13:1 reads, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" And Psalm 90 verse 13 reads, "Turn, O Lord, how long? Have compassion on your servants." And Psalm 130 verse 1 reads, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." And Psalm 88 verse 13 reads, "I, O Lord, cry out to you. In the morning my prayer comes before you." An important question throughout John's Gospel as people come to Jesus is Jesus asking them, "What are you looking for?" Jesus asked it of people who wanted to follow him. Jesus asked it of people who came to him for healing. And on the night of his arrest, he asks those who came to him twice, "Whom are you looking for?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Yet when Jesus told them, I am he. They stepped back and they fell to the ground. Both questions are still valid for us today. What are you looking for? And whom are you looking for? Thank you for joining me again today as we continue along this journey toward the 13th Sunday after Pentecost, August the 22nd, 2013. If you have a question or thought or concern, or you even just want to make a comment, please do so below this video. You can find the comment section. And I hope you're having a great day. Take care. God bless.